Buongiorno tutti quanti e benvenuti in Italian for Beginners. In this lesson, we'll be talking about the passato prossimo with avere. The book for this course is Prego, an invitation to Italian by Graziana Lazzarino. We're using the 8th edition of this book. This is a change from the early videos in the course when we used an earlier edition that's no longer in print, but since it's out of print, we've changed to the 8th edition now. Questa è una lezione emozionante perché in questo video imparerete a parlare di quello che è successo nel passato. In italiano usiamo i tempi in un modo un po' diverso dall'inglese e spiegherò queste differenze anche in questo video. Leggiamo il dialoghetto a pagina 113 sotto il titolo Passato prossimo con avere. Se trovate difficoltà a capire le forme sottolineate, non preoccupatevi. La traduzione si trova in fondo alla pagina e le forme le discutiamo fra un attimo. Paolo. Buongiorno Massimo. Hai già fatto colazione? Massimo. Ho bevuto solo un caffè. Paolo. Cosa? Ho letto che la colazione è il pasto principale della giornata. Massimo. Hai ragione, Paolo, ma stamattina ho dormito troppo e... Paolo. Ho capito. Andiamo al bar a fare uno spuntino. Now here you'll see the underlined passato prossimo forms. We'll talk in just a minute about what those are and how they work. You can see that the forms are made up of two words and sometimes they're separated. So we'll talk about both of those facts in this video. So the first thing I want to talk about is what we're going to be expressing when we use the passato prossimo. The passato prossimo is a tense that we use to refer to actions that took place and were completed in the past. So, hai già fatto colazione is have you already had breakfast? Have you had breakfast? Sono tornate verso le 8 means they, feminine plural, came back around 8. Another example would be stamattina Luca ha incontrato degli amici al bar. This morning Luca met some friends at the cafe. So you'll notice that these don't all use the same tense that we use in English. So there are a few different English tenses that can correspond to the passato prossimo but don't always. So you kind of have to learn in which individual cases it's appropriate to use the passato prossimo. And the rule of thumb is if an action took place in the past and was completed in the past, that's a time when you can use the passato prossimo. So the passato prossimo can correspond to the English present perfect tense. I have done something. But more often, it corresponds to the English simple past tense. I did something. Occasionally, it can also be more like the English emphatic past tense, like I did do something. But the most common one is probably the simple past tense. So the passato prossimo, the most important thing to know is that it's never used for actions that are ongoing. So one example that English speakers usually make is this mistake here, where people will say, Ho studiato italiano per 7 anni. This is a valid Italian sentence, and it means I studied Italian for 7 years but don't anymore. So in English, even though we would say I have studied, and that looks the same as ho studiato, in Italian that actually means that you don't study anymore. So if you want to say that you've studied for 7 years or however many years and you're still studying, then that would be studio italiano da 7 anni. So again, using the present tense to indicate actions that are ongoing. So the passato prossimo is formed using two words. It combines the present tense of avere or essere and the participio passato of the main verb. So in this context, one thing that we're going to be saying is we call avere or essere the auxiliary verb. So when you use the passato prossimo, the verb that it's the passato prossimo of is going to be in the participio passato, and then you'll put the present tense of avere or essere before that. So I'm going to explain a little more about how that works. Let's talk about how to form the participio passato first, though. So the way that you form the passato prossimo is by adding endings again to the stem of verbs that end in are, ire, and ere. There are numerous exceptions, and we'll talk about them in an upcoming slide. So the basic regular way of forming the participio passato is by adding ato to the stem of are verbs, uto to the stem of ere verbs, and ito to the stem of ire verbs. Oops, I got it backwards on the slide, sorry. So it's ato for are verbs, uto for ere verbs, and ito for ire verbs. So the examples would be that tornare then becomes tornato, avere becomes avuto, and dormire becomes dormito. So here are some examples of using the passato prossimo. We can say Paola ha dormito a lungo. That's Paola slept in. Ieri sono andata da un'amica. Yesterday I went to a friend's. That one's a little different. In this lesson we're talking about passato prossimo with avere, and this one uses essere, so don't worry too much that it's a little different. We'll talk about that in the next video. And finally, ho ricevuto una lettera da mia mamma. I got a letter from my mom. So I just wanted to add, speaking of examples using essere, you use the present tense of avere or essere as an auxiliary verb in the passato prossimo. However, you do not have the choice. It's certain verbs use avere and certain other verbs use essere, so you kind of have to memorize what those are, and there is somewhat of a system for knowing. So here are some examples with regular verbs conjugated with avere. So starting with studiare. Io ho studiato. Tu hai studiato. That's again the singular form, but also the informal form. So next you would have lui o lei ha studiato. He, she, or you, formal, studied. Noi abbiamo studiato. We studied. Voi avete studiato. You, plural, studied. And loro o loro hanno studiato. they or you, plural and very formal, studied. So now, ho ricevuto, with ricevere, we have ho ricevuto, I received, hai ricevuto, lui o lei ha ricevuto, noi abbiamo ricevuto, voi avete ricevuto, and loro o loro hanno ricevuto. Finally, an ire example with dormire. Ho dormito, hai dormito, lui, lei o lei ha dormito, noi abbiamo dormito, voi avete dormito, and loro o loro hanno dormito. So you can see that in all these cases, the verb avere is conjugated as you would expect in the present tense. So io ho, tu hai, lui, lei o lei ha, noi abbiamo, voi avete, and loro hanno. So you can rely on that always being the same, and then the past participle just gets stuck after that. So irregular past participles, as I mentioned earlier, are pretty common. In fact, the past participles of verbs ending in ere that are stressed on the stem are usually irregular. So that's the bad news. The good news is that there do seem to be some patterns to how these past participles are formed. And so you do, over time, kind of develop the ability to make an educated guess about what one must be. So that's the good news. The bad news is that it takes a lot of memorizing before you start to recognize those patterns. So one thing that I recommend is that every time you learn a verb, you should also learn if its past participle is regular or irregular, and if so, what the past participle is, as well as any other irregular tenses. So here are some of the most common ones. So essere, the past participle is stato, which is also the past participle of stare, which is regular in that case. So essere and stare have the same past participle, which is stato. For fare, it's fatto with the double T. For bere, it's bevuto, using the stem bev, which you'll see frequently with the verb bere. The past participle of aprire is aperto, of dire is detto, of offrire is offerto, and of vedere is visto. So these are some of the ones that are not of the ere verbs stressed on the stem. These are just a number of random verbs that you may need to use that have irregular past participles. Here we have a table of irregular ere verbs, so get ready. I'm going to give you the irregular past participles as well as an example of how you would use it in the passato prossimo. So the first one is chiedere, to ask for. The past participle of chiedere is chiesto. So an example would be ho chiesto il gesso al professore. I asked the professor for the chalk. You can see that chiedere works a little different in Italian than it does in English. So the direct object of chiedere is the thing you're asking for, and the indirect object, al professore, is who you're asking. So literally in Italian, you would say, I asked the chalk to the professor. but in English we would translate that, I asked the professor for the chalk. All right, next example, chiudere, to close, has the past participle chiuso. Maria, hai chiuso la finestra? Maria, have you closed the window? Notice in this case I translated that as have closed, but still that's an action that was completed in the past. You could also say, Maria, did you close the window? Correre, to run. Past participle corso. Carla ha corso 5 chilometri stamattina. Carla ran 5 kilometers this morning. Decidere di, to decide to. Deciso is the past participle. Cosa avete deciso di fare? What did you decide to do? Or what have you decided to do? Rispondere, to answer, has the past participle risposto. Hanno risposto al nostro messaggio means have they responded to our message? Leggere, to read, has the past participle letto. In classe abbiamo letto Moby Dick. In class, we read Moby Dick. Mettere, to put, has the past participle messo. Signora, ha messo dello zucchero nel caffè? Means, ma'am, did you put some sugar in the coffee? But wait, there's more. Prendere, to take, has the past participle preso. Marco ha preso un'aspirina per il mal di testa. Marco took an aspirin for his headache. Perdere, to lose, has the past participle perso. Ho perso l'autobus stamattina. Idiomatically, we would say, I missed the bus this morning. So perdere usually means to lose, but that's a case where you also use perdere, is if you miss your bus, miss your train, miss your flight, whatever. Dipingere, to paint, has the past participle dipinto. Hai dipinto la tua camera da letto? Have you painted your room? Rispondere, to answer, has the past participle risposto. Non hanno risposto al nostro messaggio. They have not responded to our message. Scrivere, to write, has the past participle scritto. Avete scritto una lettera a vostra mamma? Have you written a letter to your mother? And finally, vedere, to see. I mentioned this one before, but it has two possibilities. Two possibilities, visto or veduto. Of these, I've mainly heard visto. So, hai visto il nuovo film di Spielberg? Could also be hai veduto il nuovo film di Spielberg, but I would say visto is more common. So, you may want to know how you say that you didn't do something in the past, or how to say when or how you did it. To negate the passato prossimo, like with other tenses, you're going to use non, and it goes before the auxiliary verb, so before whatever form you have of avere or essere. Non ho lavato I piatti. I haven't washed the dishes. Non abbiamo ricevuto la vostra lettera. We haven't received your letter. Most short adverbs are going to go between the auxiliary verb and the past participle, other than adverbs of time. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But a few examples. Ho già lavato I piatti. I've already washed the dishes. Non abbiamo ancora visto la meglio gioventù. We haven't seen la meglio gioventù yet. Or we still haven't seen la meglio gioventù. Hanno appena letto l'Inferno di Dante would be they just read Dante's Inferno. So here's another table with some examples. Già is already. Avete già lavato I piatti? Have you already washed the dishes? Non ancora is not yet. Non abbiamo ancora lavato I piatti. We haven't washed the plates yet, or haven't washed the dishes yet. You can also say we still haven't washed the dishes. Appena means just or barely. So, ho appena ricevuto la tua mail. I just got your email. Non mai means never. Non ha mai visitato l'Italia would be he or she has never visited Italy. Sempre is always. Hanno sempre mangiato la pizza. They have always eaten pizza. And again, I would point out that this suggests that they don't eat pizza anymore. Otherwise, if they still eat pizza, it would be mangiano sempre la pizza in the present tense. So when you use mai separately from non, it means ever. So, avete mai visitato le Hawaii? Have you ever visited Hawaii? So those are a few of the common adverbs that you'll see go between the auxiliary verb and the past participle in the passato prossimo. Here are some longer adverbial phrases and adverbs of time that don't go in between, and some examples of how those do fit into the sentence. So, sabato sera, meaning Saturday evening. Hai invitato Carla alla festa sabato sera? Have you invited Carla to the party Saturday evening? Also, did you invite Carla to the party Saturday evening? Alle 8 stamattina, at 8 this morning. Ho incontrato le amiche al bar alle 8 stamattina. So, again, this is going to the end of the sentence. I would say that that's common for these longer phrases. I met my friends at the cafe at 8 this morning. La settimana scorsa, last week, you'll hear that a lot. Or l'anno scorso, or l'estate scorsa. Mio figlio ha finito gli esami la settimana scorsa. My son finished his exams last week. Venerdì scorso, last Friday. Venerdì scorso ho mangiato una bistecca. Last Friday, I ate a steak. And then finally, ieri. This is not a longer phrase, but it is an adverb of time. So it also goes either before or after the passato prossimo. Ieri abbiamo studiato chimica per 6 ore. Yesterday we studied chemistry for 6 hours. So that's it for the passato prossimo con avere. I know that's a bit much to digest, so if you want to rewatch the video, look through the book, especially try to remember those irregular past participles. So the compiti are the esercizi on pages 115 to 116 in the book. The exercise key is linked in the video description. And yeah, so our next lesson is going to be the passato prossimo conjugated with essere. So stay tuned for that. Yes, if you are following along in this course and don't want to miss the next video, please subscribe. As usual, questions are welcome in the comment section, as are any corrections from native Italian speakers who have noticed I've made a mistake or done something wrong. So yes, please leave those in the comments, and I will see you in our next lesson, the passato prossimo with essere.